Dubro Suspicion Files.
Okay, so picture this. December 1900. On this remote, storm-battered rock in the middle of the North Atlantic, 3 lighthouse keepers just vanish. Without a trace. Their disappearance turned into one of the biggest maritime mysteries of all time. You know, the kind of ghost stories sailors have whispered about for more than 100 years. So today, let's dive into this and peel back the layers of chilling fiction to get to the even more terrifying truth. You've probably heard this phrase before. It's supposed to be the last haunting entry in the Lighthouse logbook. And yeah, it's poetic, it's creepy, and it's completely made up. It was never, ever written down. The real story, you see, isn't found in a fake logbook entry, but in the actual physical evidence that was left behind. You know, the popular version of the Flannan Isles story is this incredible tale of madness, and maybe even a supernatural storm. But, well, it's pretty much pure fiction. What's really fascinating here is how a century of palms and sensationalist magazines totally buried the scientific explanation for what happened to those 3 men.
So this is the ghost story, right? This is the legend. It says the men were terrified. One was crying, another was getting really irritable. The logbook was supposedly this minute-by-minute account of their descent into madness. And of course, the most famous image is the rescue party walking in to find this scene of absolute panic. A chair knocked over, a meal just left half-eaten, like they were just snatched away in the middle of dinner. It's a fantastic story. It's just not what happened.
Okay, let's get to the facts. It's Boxing Day 1900, and the relief ship, the Hesperus, shows up at the island. But they're met with this really unnerving silence. The flag isn't flying, nobody's there to greet them. A relief keeper named Joseph Moore is the first one to go ashore. He has to climb all the way up to the lighthouse by himself, unlock the door, and step right into the middle of this mystery.
And these were the men at the center of it all. It's so important to remember they weren't, some volatile characters out of a horror novel. They were totally professionals. James Ducat, he was a steady family man, a veteran of the service for over 20 years. Thomas Marshall, a former sailor who knew the sea inside and out. And Donald MacArthur, a quiet, reliable local guy. These were not men who were prone to panic or madness.
And this right here, this is where that whole legend just completely falls apart when you look at the evidence. The myth of the half-eaten meal and the overturned chair? Nope. The first man on the scene found a totally tidy kitchen, clean utensils, and the chair was upright. The logbook that was supposedly filled with entries about crying and praying, it had nothing but routine weather data and that famous last line, God is over all. The actual final entry was just a simple 9 a.m. barometer and wind reading from December 15th.
So this is absolutely crucial. The state of the lighthouse showed that all the morning chores for December 15th were done. The lamp was cleaned, it was refilled, all ready to be lit at dusk. The kitchen was clean. This wasn't a sudden interruption during a meal. All the evidence suggests that whatever went down, it happened in the afternoon, well after the day's work was finished.
So the tidy lighthouse was actually a bit of a red herring. The official investigation found 2 critical clues, not inside, but outside, that pointed away from ghosts and madness, and toward an events of just immense, almost unimaginable physical violence.
The first clue was found right there in the entrance hall. 2 sets of the heavy, waterproof oilskins were gone. The assumption is that Ducat and Marshall were wearing them. But the third set, the one belonging to Donald MacArthur, was still hanging on its peg.
And you really have to ask yourself this question. Think about it. In the bitter cold and salty spray of a North Atlantic winter, no keeper in his right mind would ever go outside without his foul weather gear. The only explanation that makes any sense is that MacArthur left in an extreme rush. He was either running to help someone or running from something.
Now for the second clue, and this one takes us from the calm inside the lighthouse to a scene of just absolute devastation outside. On the West Landing, a part of the island that takes the full brunt of the Atlantic, investigators found damage that was just hard to even comprehend.
Just try to get your head around that number, 110 feet. That is the height of an 11-story building. And at that height, solid iron railings and a massive chest full of ropes were literally torn out of the rock and just vanished. This wasn't a normal storm. This was something else entirely. A solid wall of water.
The amount of power we're talking about is just astronomical. A boulder weighing over a ton was ripped from the cliff face and just tossed onto a pathway like it was a pebble. The evidence was undeniable. The island had been hit by a wave of incredible, unbelievable size and violence. So how do all these pieces fit together? When you combine the forensic evidence, the oil skins left behind, the very specific damage, the time of day, only one explanation really makes sense. And it's not supernatural, it's scientific. We're talking about a rogue wave.
Rogue waves are very real. They're a documented phenomenon. They're these massive, solitary waves that can just pop up in the open ocean and are way, way bigger than any of the seas around them. And the key here is the geography of that West Landing. It's a narrow, steep inlet that basically acts like a funnel, concentrating all the wave's energy and forcing that water upwards to these incredible heights.
So, here is the most probable reconstruction of what happened. It's the afternoon of December 15th. The big storm has passed, but the sea is still really heavy. Duke and Marshall, wearing their oilskins, go down to the West Landing to secure their equipment. From the lighthouse, 200 feet up, MacArthur spots this enormous wave building on the horizon. Realizing his friends are in mortal danger, he just sprints out the door, no time to grab his coat, to scream a warning. But it's too late. The wave hits that inlet, funnels upwards, and just sweeps over the landing with unstoppable force, carrying all 3 men into the sea.
You see, this theory explains every single piece of the evidence. It explains the damage, it explains the missing men, and crucially, it explains why one man left his oilskins behind. So, why do we still tell the ghost story? Why does the fiction seem to have more power than the actual facts?
Well, the myth really comes from 2 specific places. In 1912, a popular poem just invented the details about the overturned chair and the uneaten meal to make the story more dramatic. Then, in 1929, an American pulp magazine called True Strange Stories just flat out made up those terrifying logbook entries. And these 2 pieces of fiction, repeated over and over for decades, just became more famous than the truth. The truth, it turns out, is less of a story and more of a bleak, simple equation of physics. 3 experienced men, just doing their jobs, encountered a force of nature so powerful that it completely overwhelmed them and the very rock they were standing on. There were no ghosts, there was no madness, just the terrifying, indifferent power of the ocean.
But the real legacy of this tragedy is actually a practical one. The disaster really put a spotlight on how vulnerable these isolated keepers were. It showed that just, watching a light through a telescope from shore wasn't good enough. It pushed the lighthouse service to start adopting wireless radios for communication, and it ultimately helped spur the big drive toward automating lighthouses, making sure no one would ever be so dangerously alone again. So, scientifically speaking, the mystery of the Flannan Isles is pretty much closed. We know with a really high degree of certainty what happened. But this whole thing leaves us with a different kind of question, doesn't it? In the long run, does a straightforward, scientific truth ever really stand a chance against a more compelling, more human, and frankly, more terrifying story?